All right, as a follow-up to the last video that I made about the Recover 2020 brace, I am going to try it out with the SRO mounted directly to the slide. I wrote this option off initially because I didn't think that I'd be able to get my head low enough on the brace to see through the sight, but I tried it out and it's really not too bad. The window on the SRO is so big that even though the dot isn't centered, you can still see through it pretty well. So we'll take it out to the range and see how it does.
The first thing that I did when I got out to the range was to shoot 4 5-shot groups at 50
All right,
yards.
now the very
The first
right
group
side
that
of
I
the
shot
window.
printed pretty high into the right, so I just shot a second one to see if I got the same result. And the second group did not print to the right, but it was strung out vertically. I think that was about a 10-inch spread in the group. I started to think then that parallax may be a factor, and I shot the next two groups doing my very best to hold my head so that the dot was centered in the window, and I got much better results. The picture on the right is just the photo that I snapped on the range, and then when I got back to the computer, I added all this other stuff to help explain what's going on. The blue group is the first one that I fired, and you can see how it's kind of strung out high and right. I shot the red group second. Um, those circles with the little crosshair in them, that's where I was aiming for each group, and then the colored dots are where the hits were, and then those colored lines are 1-inch hashes to kind of show the size of the group. The red group here, it biased high from where I was aiming, and the fact that it had so much vertical stringing made me think that there was possibly some parallax coming into play here. I did end up dialing down because both the blue and the red group had printed high, so I put in 19 MOA down um, on the dot, and then I fired the purple group. When I fired the purple group, I was very careful to keep the dot centered in the window, and you can see how much the group tightened up. Um, much, much better than the previous two. The green group was the fourth one. It opened up again, but it's still centered in the, or it's centered on where I was aiming. And then the gold group was a bit of an odd one. So I fired 8 rounds, and 2 rounds I fired with the red dot as high in the window as I could get it. And then I fired 2 rounds with it as far to the left and the right as I could get it. And then I fired 2 rounds with it with the dot as low as I could get it in the window. And I did that just to see what effect parallax was having. What I expected with the gold group was to have 2 shots high, 2 shots low, 2 shots left and right. And as you can see, I have 6 kind of horizontally strung, and then I have 1 high flyer and 1 low flyer. So I don't really know how to explain that, but I do know how to explain the horizontal flyers, and I will get to that in this next video clip.
All right, I have this thing set up. I'm gonna try really hard to not bump it. Just moving the phone. All right there, you see that? How the dot drops off target? It's pretty good on the sides. Not a lot of deviation there. At the top of the window though, see how the dot starts to come down? Let's see what the bottom of the window does. And then not a lot of play at the bottom of the window either. It's these top, I don't know, maybe the top sixth, the top eighth of the window is where you start to see that parallax. Everywhere else is pretty good.
So as you just saw in that clip, I think the dot being in the top of the window is why I was having issues to begin with, and why I didn't really see horizontal stringing when I did the parallax test on that golden group. So what I want to show now is some footage that I took the day before I went out and shot. I was just messing around with the brace and seeing what the sight picture looked like, and what types of red dots might work. But all of this footage is from the day before I shot, so keep that in mind.
One thing that I want to clarify is that if you want to go this route, you're going to have to get a dot with a big window. Something like an RMR probably isn't going to work. The SRO, again, because the window is so large, let's see if I can get it in frame here. There we go. Even if, like, when I'm looking through it normally, that is about where the dot is. That's about what my sight picture is when I'm shouldering this thing. If I really fight to get my head down, I can push the dot back to the center of the window. But I consider this still a usable sight picture. It's relatively parallax free, and it shouldn't present an issue.
All right, so remember what I said, that was recorded the day before I shot, and I didn't think that whatever parallax was in the sight would be a problem. But when your sight picture looks like this freeze frame right here, you have the dot in the parallax zone, if you will, of the sight window. And that parallax zone is enough to cause misses and big groups at 50 yards. So this issue is not as big as the whole pistol shifting in the brace. This is certainly a much better option than a brace mounted dot, but it's something that you still have to keep in mind. And if you're going to put a red dot on the slide, you're going to have to smash your face down into that brace and make sure that the dot is somewhat centered in the window, or else you're going to be kind of right back to where you started. I'm going to play another couple of quick clips here that just talk about red dot selection if you decide to go with a slide mounted dot.
As a comparison, I'm going to take this Steiner MPS here that I had been using on the brace bridge mount, and I'm going to set it on the slide. And I don't know how well that's going to come across, but that is about the height that it would sit if it was mounted on the pistol. And you can already see how much smaller the window is, how much lower the window is, and then how much extra housing is around it. So if you look at the length of the housing between these two dots, this one is so much shorter, which means that if you're kind of off axis, it is much easier. I mean, I'm exaggerating this here, but it's much easier to see through the sight, even if you aren't perfectly behind it. If I put this MPS at that same angle, you cannot see through it at all, and you won't be able to see through it until right there. You can just barely start to see through, whereas you can almost completely see through the SRO. Again, just exaggerating the effect here, but you have to be much more precisely behind the MPS than you do with SRO. Now, this is probably going to be tough to get to come across, and the dots are super blown out. That top dot is from the MPS. The bottom dot is from the SRO. So obviously the MPS isn't sighted in. Maybe if I sighted in, it would be a little bit more usable. But just with how low that window is, I don't think it would be. And you can see with the SRO, like I said, that is typically the sight picture that I'm getting when I shoulder this thing like I would shoulder an AR-15 stock. That's about where the dot sits. MPS, SRO.
All right, enough talking about red dots. The next thing that I did was I shot 5 Dickens drills, and I recorded those results against all the previous results that I had gotten from the earlier testing. I might put up the targets here in a minute, but for now we're just going to look at the Excel sheet. The highlighted yellow is the recover brace with the SRO mounted directly to the pistol slide, and you can see how much better it did than the recover brace with the MPS mounted to the brace itself. If you look at the bottom row, you'll see the very worst Dickens drill that I shot. I just rushed. I shot it in just over 5 seconds, and 3 Alpha, 3 Charlie, 3 Delta, 1 Mike. Pretty crummy, but if you look at the top 4, you'll see that it was almost in line with me shooting my rifle. Uh, definitely a big step up over the last time I shot the brace, and a even larger step over the pistols. In fact, it almost doubled my average hit factor over the pistols. This next picture here was when I removed that lowest scoring Dickens drill. When I shot the other Dickens drills for the other guns, I shot more than 5. I threw out the lowest one, and or if I felt like I had really flubbed, I threw out the lowest score. So doing that same courtesy for the recover brace with the slide mounted SRO, you'll see that the hit factor jumps to a 6.8, which is, again, pretty close to the rifle. In fact, it's closer to the rifle than it is to the recover brace previously, and it's almost double what I did with the handguns. I took some shots at the 8-inch gong from 130 yards. I probably fired about 30 or 40 rounds at it, and I only scored 2 hits. I figured that I was going to be getting some drop, so I just guesstimated my hold over the gong. Is pretty tough to do, and with the size of the groups at that distance, I just was only able to nick it once or twice. So after that, I set up a silhouette at 130 yards, and I shot another group of 22 rounds, and this is the result. So this is the silhouette. I was holding in the center of the A box, and you can see all the shots that hit paper were low. I had 10 rounds on paper out of the 22 that I fired, and you can see that it was hitting anywhere from 5 to about 15 inches low, or actually lower for all the rounds that dropped off the paper. This group is, I have to guess at the size of it because obviously I can't see where all of the impacts are, but rough wag, it's probably about 20 inches max, maybe 15 inches. So 15-inch group at 100 yards is really not bad. And most of that, as you can see here, is just the variance and the drop. And I can confidently say that this is a better group than I would be able to shoot at 130 yards with a handgun. So my revised opinion on the brace is that it is, with a
I'll try to keep
slide-mounted
the dot as
optic,
centered as I
it
can
is
in the
worth
window.
using. It certainly allows me to shoot better than I can with just the pistol. It's still a little bulky. It's less bulky now that the optics mount and that rail is gone off of the front, but it's still obviously much bulkier than a Glock 17 or a Glock 34 by itself. The other big advantage to having the red dot mounted directly to the slide instead of to that optics bridge is that you don't have to worry about losing your zero when you take the pistol out of the brace, and you only have one screw that you have to take out in order to remove the pistol, as opposed to 5 if you're using that optics bridge that I had been using. All told, I think that this is the way to go. You have to be cognizant of how you have your head on the brace, and you have to make sure you're getting down behind the optic. But if you do that, you're going to get pretty good accuracy, and certainly better accuracy than most people are able to get out of a handgun. And you have more flexibility. You can have your pistol as a concealed carry, and then if you want to put it in the brace for fun, to shoot a competition, PCC competition, something like that, you can change it from one configuration to another much easier than you can if you're using the bridge. At this point, I think this is probably the best option if you want a Glock magazine fed PDW. There's a lot of them out there. There's Flux braces, there's the B&T brace, there's multiple different chassis systems, but from what I've seen and the testing that I've done, I think that this is probably the slimmest, lightest, and most accurate of the Glock chassis systems. And until something better comes along, or I decide to drop the coin on something like a B&T USW, I think that this is the way that I'm going to go. I appreciate you watching, and let me know if you have any other questions or if there's anything else that you'd like to see tested with this brace.